There are truths most people will never admit out loud. When you withdraw from a woman, something dark wakes up inside her. It isn't anger, and it isn't neutrality. It's desire, mixed with the unsettling fear of losing control. In your silence, you become a shadow, an absence that gnaws at her, a presence that dominates without even trying. And that's precisely where the game begins. The moment she realizes she's no longer the one in control. People pretend otherwise, but every human relationship is governed by invisible forces. Forces that move beneath polite speech, beneath stated intentions, beneath the moral stories people tell themselves. Attraction is no exception. And through Machiavelli's cold logic, ignoring a woman, when done by a man she has already noticed, evaluated, and marked as potentially desirable, is not just a passive gesture, it's a strategic shift, a move that tilts the balance of power. This isn't about cruelty, revenge, or genuine indifference. It's about creating a psychological vacuum, an emotional gap, a space where predictability once lived. And it's inside that gap that desire grows. Because desire is not born from comfort, it's born from uncertainty, from absence, from the burning question, why isn't he reacting like everyone else? Women aren't drawn to what's obvious. Obvious is predictable. Predictable is dull. And dullness suffocates desire. Machiavelli understood something most men never grasp. If you want to be desired, offering yourself is not enough. You must become the unknown, a puzzle, a subject of speculation. Strategic silence dismantles defenses. It breaks patterns and activates primal instincts of competition and validation. Whether people admit it or not, attraction has always involved hierarchy. Who chases? Who withdraws? Who controls the rhythm? Who desires? And who is being desired? The moment you become scarce, she's forced to reevaluate your value. And inside that reevaluation, fascination begins. Because when you reply instantly, you signal availability. When you insist, you signal need. When you try to prove yourself, you signal unworthiness. But when you ignore with calm silence, with controlled coldness, you create the feeling that you know something she doesn't. You become unpredictable, and the unpredictable is dangerous. Women have always been attracted to danger, not because they enjoy suffering, but because danger activates emotional alertness. It raises inner adrenaline. It increases the feeling of relevance. When she watches you and realizes you don't bend, you don't shake, and you don't twist yourself just to get her attention, a natural alarm goes off inside her. He's not reacting like the others. And that thought is the beginning of the fall, because the human mind cannot tolerate unanswered questions. The more she tries to fill the silence with interpretations, the more space you occupy inside her. Paradoxically, without doing absolutely anything, silence is more provocative than any attempt at seduction. Silence suggests control. It suggests you have options. It suggests you operate in a different mental territory, and it forces the other person to move toward you, to adjust their behavior, to recover what they feel they're losing. Machiavelli would say, absence is a weapon because it shifts the axis of need. What used to be hers now must be earned back. Ignoring a woman doesn't mean treating her with disrespect. It means treating her with the cold discipline of a man who is not emotionally governed by her. And that difference is everything. Disrespect pushes her away. Coldness pulls her in. Coldness creates doubts because women always try to decode men. They want to understand how he thinks, what he feels, and what weakness is hiding behind that neutral face. When you ignore her, you reveal no weakness. You remove emotional desperation from your actions. You make it clear you move only when you choose, not when you're provoked. Most men fail because they try to create attraction by offering too much. Too much security, too much attention, too much availability. And excess suffocates. Predictability kills magnetism. A woman only feels deep desire. When a man awakens in her the sense that he could live perfectly fine without her. That is the Machiavellian paradox. You attract more when you show less need. Absence doesn't reduce your value, it multiplies it. And there's another truth nobody admits out loud. When a woman realizes you are willing to walk away, she immediately starts measuring internally the impact of that loss. And while she's measuring that distance, she's forced to face emotions she may not want to admit. The question changes. It's no longer, do I want him? It becomes, why doesn't he want me? It's subtle, it's deep, and in that shift, you start occupying a far more powerful psychological space in her mind. Because when you ignore her, you create contrast. She feels your absence because before she had your presence, and nothing is more seductive than what is no longer guaranteed. The human mind is wired to value what can be lost. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved." But in the game of attraction, it is better to be uncertain than to be available. Uncertainty keeps attention alive, and wherever attention becomes intense, desire grows. The man who ignores her isn't playing childish games, he's protecting himself. He's making one thing clear. I will not be manipulated, I will not be used as emotional entertainment, I will not be a replaceable piece on your chessboard. He shows that he has choices too. And nothing is more irresistible to a woman than a man who knows how to choose and, most importantly, knows how to say no. Because denial is the strongest form of psychological power, not because it hurts, but because it reveals independence. And independence is what truly defines a strong man in a woman's eyes. She may try to rationalize it, she may tell herself, "I don't care, he's just another guy." But the body reacts before the mind does. And the absence you create becomes like a perfume that stays in the air even after someone has left the room. She feels it even if she doesn't want to. And the more she tries to ignore the discomfort, the stronger it becomes. Because the real problem isn't you, it's what you represent. The risk of not being chosen by someone she wanted to choose her. That's what most people never understand. Ignoring doesn't create hatred, it creates meaning. And psychologically, whatever has meaning dominates the mind. Your silence becomes a question, your absence becomes a presence, your calm becomes mystery. Women have always been attracted to what they can't decode. When a man ignores a woman, he forces her into an emotional territory where she has no control. And that's something few people have the courage to admit. Women grow up learning that male attention is abundant, constant, almost automatic. They grow up noticing the looks, the kindness, the comments, the messages, the free validation, and all of this silently shapes an expectation. That male interest is guaranteed that simply existing is enough to be desired. But when you break this pattern, you break the entire psychological structure on which she built her perception of value around men. And in that shock, in that silent collapse, a feeling is born that no romance book ever dares to admit. Attraction to absence, fascination with the unknown, desire for what refuses to submit to expectation. Because what she finds in you isn't rejection, it's unpredictability. Rejection hurts, but unpredictability confuses. And confusion is far more powerful. Her mind starts creating explanations, theories, hypotheses. She watches you silently, analyzes your gestures, your reactions, your patterns, tries to find an opening, tries to predict your next move. But because you're not playing on the same emotional chessboard as the other men, she gets lost. And getting lost in someone is the first step toward feeling trapped by them. What Machiavelli knew, and what very few understand today, is that power is not in noise, but in silence. Not in constant movement, but in pauses. Not in always advancing, but in stepping back at the right moment. Ignoring her is a calculated step back. You don't disappear out of weakness. You disappear out of control. Not out of fear, but out of self-mastery. The absence you create isn't neglect, it's intention. And silent intention is one of the strongest forms of influence a person can have over another. With time, she starts looking at you differently. Before you were just another man among many. But human beings don't value what is abundant. They value what stands out, what escapes the ordinary, what can't be bought, what doesn't bend. When you ignore her, you become that rare thing. You break the pattern. You rise above the crowd. Not through loud strength, but through the inner coldness you show. She notices you don't need to chase, and that creates a brutal contrast compared to every other man who tried to win her before. And contrast is exactly what awakens interest. She may not admit it, but she feels there's something about you, something she still hasn't figured out. And what we don't understand, we try to conquer. Her attention becomes proof of that. She starts testing you subtly. Sometimes it's disguised as her own indifference. Other times it hides inside small comments, measured replies, shy attempts to get closer. But now, everything she does has a purpose, to measure her impact on you. What used to be certainty has become doubt. And doubt in any power game is the force that dominates. The woman who feels she can't control your reaction enters a psychological state known for centuries but rarely named emotional vigilance. You become an active variable inside her mind. She watches how you respond to other people, how you behave in public, how you carry yourself in conflict. She tries to understand where your coldness comes from. Some people would call it pride, others would call it a big ego. But in reality, it's simply consistency. You're not cold to her, you're cold with yourself. You're not ignoring her as a game. You're ignoring her because you don't need to be present all the time. And what is rare always looks valuable. That's why absence works as such a powerful trigger. It turns an ordinary man into a complex psychological presence. She begins asking herself, did he lose interest? Did he find other options? Is he more focused on his own life? And every question that grows inside her becomes a thread pulling you deeper into her thoughts. The more questions, the more space you take inside her mind. The more she tries to resist, the stronger the impulse becomes. And here's what's interesting. When a woman feels this shift in power, she tries to regain control in subtle ways. She might post different photos, she might become more socially active, she might show slight disinterest, but all of it is reaction. And every reaction reveals vulnerability because the person who reacts has already lost part of their emotional leadership. A man who controls his own energy creates a field around himself that cannot be touched. He moves when he wants, he approaches when he decides, he pulls back when he feels it's time. He doesn't act out of fear of losing. He acts with awareness that he doesn't need to hold on to anyone. Absence works because it mirrors what romance stories never show. Women don't fall in love with excessive attention. They fall in love with the man who controls his own attention. The man who chooses when to give and when to take away. The man who refuses to become an unlimited emotional resource. When you ignore her, you make her realize your energy is not public property. Only a man who truly understands his worth can do that without turning it into disrespect. And that's where the dark magic happens. She starts comparing herself to other women in secret. Her mind asks, is he giving attention to someone else? And the moment that question appears, something bigger wakes up inside her. Female competitiveness, one of the oldest instincts and one of the least admitted. She doesn't just want you, she wants to prove she can win you. She wants to claim something that doesn't seem easy to take. You become the prize and she becomes the one chasing, and the game flips. This doesn't happen because you're cruel. It happens because you're disciplined, because you don't act like a desperate man, because you don't need to beg for validation. You don't step into her world, you make her step into yours. And once she steps in, a deep psychological bond begins to form. It's not just physical attraction anymore, not just superficial curiosity. It becomes an emotional need to regain something she feels she's losing. But what she's losing isn't you. What she's losing is the version of herself that believed she had power over you. Absence destroys her control, and once that control is destroyed, she starts craving to rebuild it. And that rebuilding is exactly what creates attachment. She starts dreaming, imagining scenarios, reading your silence like it has its own language. Silence becomes a message. Absence becomes presence. Coldness becomes magnetism. That's what nobody says. Ignoring when done with authenticity, not immaturity, puts a man in a position of power that cannot be bought, cannot be demanded, cannot be forced. It can only be given automatically by the woman who realizes she lost the initial advantage. And over time, something even deeper begins to happen inside her mind. Something Machiavelli, if he lived today, would observe with surgical precision. She begins interpreting your absence not as a single act, but as a reflection of your character. Your absence starts shaping the mental image she has of you. It creates a figure that feels heavier, denser, more mysterious, harder to reach. And it's always what's hard to reach that feels valuable. Nobody falls in love with something they can have anytime they want. People fall in love with what threatens to escape, with what doesn't bend, with what challenges them. When you ignore her, you interrupt the natural flow of her expectations. And human beings live off expectations, especially in relationships. She expects messages. She expects replies. She expects proof of interest. When that doesn't happen, her mind enters a state of tension. And tension is the essential ingredient of desire. Desire doesn't come from comfort, it comes from inner pressure, from what feels like it's about to break, from what provokes. And by ignoring her, you become that point of tension, that invisible force pulling at her mind, not through excess, but through lack. Because lack is powerful, it leaves space for imagination. And imagination is far more intense than reality. In her imagination, she creates versions of you that make you bigger, more interesting, more important, more dominant. She starts seeing you through a lens that amplifies mystery. When you're too present, she sees you as just another man. When you're absent, she sees you as an enigma. And enigmas are always more seductive than exposed truths. This psychological process is silent but devastating. She starts noticing small things the moment you read her message and don't reply. How long you take to respond, how your energy doesn't change even when she tries to provoke you. And every detail becomes a symbol. And symbols are dangerous because they ignite imagination. She begins assigning you traits you may not even have simply because absence lets her fill the gaps with her own projections. She starts seeing you as busy, selective, hard to impress. And all of that increases your magnetism. She may even try to rationalize it by saying, "I don't care." But nobody tries to ignore what truly doesn't matter. If she needs to convince herself, it's because she's already affected. Denial is always the first sign of emotional collapse. The mind tries to protect the ego by saying you're irrelevant. But the body reacts differently. She feels irritation when you take too long. She feels jealousy when she imagines other women. She feels the discomfort of your absence. That discomfort is what gives you power. Not because it hurts her, but because it proves one thing. You exist inside her. A man who masters the art of ignoring isn't playing games. He's governing his own energy. He doesn't give in to the childish impulse to reply fast just to prove something. He doesn't need to explain his absence. He understands that desire is built in the space between two poles, not in their fusion. Constant closeness destroys mystery. Moderate distance creates magnetism. That's how it works. Perfume works because it fills the air and then disappears, leaving longing behind. Music seduces because it has pauses. Words carry power because of the silence between them. Absence is the pause that makes you memorable. And over time, the woman begins doing things she would have never done before. She starts competing for your attention, even if discreetly, even while lying to herself about it. She begins adjusting photos, choosing words carefully, appearing at strategic times, giving signals she would never give if she still felt in control. And that's where the game becomes truly Machiavellian. She believes she's protecting herself, but she's exposing herself even more because everything she does now is a reaction to your energy. And reacting is losing power. A woman who reacts is vulnerable. A woman trying to get your attention is admitting she wants it back. She starts realizing she can't bend you, and that hits the ego deeply. The female ego, especially one conditioned by constant validation, doesn't handle resistance well. When you become emotional resistance, she feels the need to overcome it. It's instinctive, psychological, almost biological. It's the mind saying, "I need to prove I can awaken him." And this is where the dynamic completely changes. From that moment on, you don't even need to act. She acts for you. Your silence becomes the leader of the dance. She tries to make you move, and the less you move, the more she tries. And the more she tries, the deeper the emotional web becomes, and the deeper the web, the more space you occupy inside her. But there's a darker detail, colder, harder to admit. When you ignore a woman, you force her to confront her own insecurity. That's not cruelty, it's inevitable. She begins asking herself, "Did I lose my charm? Am I not enough? Did he see something in me that he didn't approve of?" These questions don't come from the outside. They're born inside her. And when the answer is internal, the bond becomes unavoidable. Because anything that touches self-worth traps deeper than anything that only touches emotion. A woman can resist charm, she can resist beauty, she can resist intelligence, but she cannot resist the need to prove something to herself. And you become that thing. You become the mirror where she searches for confirmation. Absence turns you into a standard of value. That is power. A power that cannot be begged for, cannot be negotiated, cannot be demanded. A silent, cold, absolute power. Exactly like Machiavelli described, the kind of power that doesn't come from what you do to others, but from what others do because of you. She starts thinking about you before sleeping, wakes up remembering what you didn't say, imagines conversations that never happened, rereads old messages looking for clues, all while you continue living your life normally without twisting yourself to impress her. And that is what hooks her even more. Your life keeps flowing while hers begins orbiting around the mystery you represent. And the most interesting part is, by this point you've already become a constant presence inside her, even while being absent. Her body reacts to your silence. Her ego reacts to your distance. Her mind reacts to your unpredictability. You become an invisible magnet operating from a distance. And the more she tries to free herself, the stronger the psychological chains become. Because to a woman, the man who doesn't give in is the man who has value. And a man with value creates desire. And desire creates persistence. And persistence creates attachment. It's a cycle. A cycle you started with something as simple as ignoring, but not ignoring like a childish, angry boy. Ignoring like a man who knows his value is not for sale. As this silent process progresses, absence stops being just an uncomfortable feeling and becomes something deeper. A wound in the ego and a wound in the female ego is one of the most powerful and dangerous forces that exist because it doesn't heal with logic. It doesn't disappear with time. It doesn't dissolve with superficial distractions. Instead, it pulses, it irritates, it creates obsession. And that's exactly what Machiavelli would understand. Power is not exercised when you control someone directly. Power is exercised when you make them desperately try to regain control over you. When you ignore her, you don't just remove your presence. You remove what your presence represented. You remove the validation she was used to receiving. You remove emotional predictability. You remove the story where she was the center of attention. And by doing that, you reveal what exists behind all masks. The vulnerability she tries to hide from the world. No woman likes to admit that she cares about a man who refuses to bend for her. No woman wants to admit that something as simple as your absence shakes her internal structure, but it does. Absence becomes a shadow that follows her during silent moments. When she's alone, when nobody is watching, that's when the truth appears. She picks up her phone just to see if you texted. She replays old conversations, searching for clues to explain your silence. She starts comparing you to other men and realizes no one affects her the way you do because no one acts the way you do. The Machiavellian mindset works through subtlety. You create scarcity where she expected abundance. And that not only increases your value, it also redefines her own value. She starts measuring her self-esteem by the reaction she isn't getting. And that is devastating because it traps her mind in a cycle that only grows stronger over time. Human logic says she should walk away, but psychology says she'll move even closer because anything that injures the ego demands repair. And it's that search for repair that makes her come back, try again, insist, and become emotionally trapped by your image. And there's an even subtler, darker phenomenon. When you ignore a woman, she begins romanticizing the absence. Not because she enjoys the pain, but because she needs to emotionally justify her own persistence. She starts imagining you as deep, mysterious, too complex to be understood. Absence becomes charm. Coldness becomes aura. Silence becomes depth. And without doing absolutely anything, you grow inside her imagination. The female mind is driven by narrative. When you cut the narrative she expected, she creates a new one. And in that new story, you are not the man who walked away. You are the man who is above average. You become the challenge. You become the enigma. You become the man who doesn't need to prove anything. And that type of man is rare, and that's exactly why he's extremely desired. Meanwhile, you stay unshaken. You don't show need. You don't try to compensate. You don't chase emotional reconciliation. Your silence says your life is bigger than any temporary dynamic. And for a woman, that is magnetic and terrifying at the same time. Terrifying because she realizes she has no power over you. Magnetic because she deeply wants that power. That's the paradox that traps the human mind. We desire what we cannot possess. And that's where another element enters, something Machiavelli would love to analyze. Comparison. Nothing is more corrosive to a woman's mind than